Oh, sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Intro to a Better Tech Economy webinar. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for the room to fill in. Grab a glass of water if you'd like, and we'll get started shortly. Now, I'll keep repeating this message a couple of times until people join. Welcome to those of you that are just joining us. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for the room to fill, waiting for some late arrivals. We'll get started shortly, and I'll keep repeating this message just probably one more time, but we should get started in about a minute or two. Hello, welcome to those of you that are just joining us. We're going to get started at 12:03, just letting the room fill in. Feel free to grab a glass of water, your lunch if you're eating right now, and we'll get started shortly. Cool. So we'll go ahead and get started. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining our Intro to a Better Tech Economy webinar. I hope y'all can hear and see me. My name is Calderon. I'm the community manager at TechEquity, and in my role, I get to engage with our supporters through our organizing efforts, and I get to engage with you all here. So feel free to drop in questions into the Q&A as we're going through the presentation, but we're not going to answer those until the end. And I do want to say that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send out a recording, the link afterwards, along with a copy of the slides and relevant links to things I talk about today. So that's in case you want to share, or in case you want to look back and go over something we talk about today. You'll have an opportunity to do that. And so what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to cover a little bit about the community's tensions with the tech industry. We'll talk about bad policy choices that have predated tech's arrival, a little bit about how tech equity fits in to combat some of these issues, and we'll talk about some solutions we've identified that can help support to ensure that the tech economy is working for everyone. And we'll kick it off with talking about the tensions with tech, like I just mentioned. I think a lot of us already know that communities are frustrated, and it really comes to no surprise. And we're seeing that when tech is shouldering the blame, it starts to create this us versus them dynamic that's further dividing communities. And personally, for myself, I've grown up in the Bay Area my whole life, and I've been able to witness this firsthand. I have friends and family who are worried about the changes they're seeing in their communities, what that means for their homes, for their jobs, for their quality of life. And I also have friends and family who ended up pursuing jobs within the tech industry, and they actually found lots of success for themselves and for their families alike. And unfortunately, as the tech sector continues to expand, with a lot of an acceleration by remote work into other cities across the country, we're seeing that many of these inequities that I experienced in the Bay Area, and that a lot of us are experiencing here, are beginning to replicate elsewhere across the country. But how do we get here? Well, we know that tech did not start this level of pain that our communities have been facing for years. Inequities have been in our economy and our society for decades, even when Silicon Valley was still farmland. And all of these feelings of frustration are understandable, like we just talked about. But there's no doubt that tech has exacerbated inequality, but tech didn't necessarily start these issues. And over the last couple of decades, there has been an overall shift in the balance of power that has hindered our community's ability to prosper and survive. So let's talk about what we've seen historically. Well, the shift in power, it really has benefited corporations. And while the government was cutting back on social programs, they were simultaneously cutting taxes for large corporations in the 80s. And individual tax rates have been following that same trajectory. It's the blue line. But we see that the corporate taxes have been on a steady decline. It's the gold line on the chart. And just to put it in perspective, in 2019, 49% of our tax revenue, around $626 billion, was collected from individuals, and 5%, around $59 billion, came from corporations. And these tax cuts and increase in profits for companies are coming at the expense of workers and their voice. And we know that corporations have a long history of suppressing worker power and voice, and there are numerous accounts of union busting and strategic attacks on worker-centered organizations that have only reinforced this profit over people approach. And a combination of all this has led to the shift in power, like we mentioned, that is still disproportionately impacting people in our economy today, decades later. And corporations really have begun to flex this power by entering into communities and buying up large portions of apartments and homes in order to maximize efforts. So we're also seeing corporations' bad practices, as they become the new landlords through inaccurate background checks, predatory ownership schemes, and exclusionary lending. And they've begun to reinforce the racist and exclusionary housing practices of the past, also known as redlining. Now, you may be wondering, what is redlining? Well, in the 1930s, the federal government instituted a policy that's still felt today, especially within communities of color in the Bay Area and California, all across the country. And that policy is redlining. And redlining was a process in which the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency, gave neighborhoods ratings to guide investment. And this policy is named for the red or hazardous neighborhoods that were deemed the riskiest. So on maps, those neighborhoods were literally redlined. As we can see with the image of the screen, it's the picture on the left is an image of neighborhoods in Seattle that have been historically redlined. And those communities that were deemed risky for investment didn't receive anything. And so these neighborhoods were predominantly home to communities of color, and that really is by no accident. The hazardous ratings were in large part based on racial demographics. So in other words, redlining was a discriminatory and a racist policy. And it made it hard for residents to get loans for something like home ownership, or a loan to maintain their home, for something like building a new roof or just maintenance that homes require. And consequently, redlining led to cycles of disinvestment, including development and production within these neighborhoods. And there's a terrible history of underinvestment, underbuilding, and exclusion in our country. And often those communities that have been historically underinvested in and have been redlined are the very same communities that are at risk of gentrification today. And on top of these exclusionary zoning policies, it's simply just too expensive to build affordable homes in our country today. Just here in San Francisco, it costs around $1.2 million to build one unit of housing. And even if more housing gets built, tenants are not being protected enough to be able to remain in their homes safely. And we've seen that eviction rates and displacement rates have continued to increase heavily over the years, families being pushed out into the outer edges of major cities, further away from job centers and resources. And just in New York, weakened tenant laws have drastically led to a decrease in homes available for people. And evictions are not just happening in expensive areas like San Francisco and New York, but also in up and coming tech cities like Atlanta. And eviction rates across the country are continuing to push our most vulnerable community members away. And on top of tenants having little to no power in order to combat these evictions, they also are lacking power in their jobs. And as we can see here, the hourly pay for workers hasn't increased much the last couple of decades, even though productivity dramatically increased. And according to the Economic Policy Institute, the share of workers that's covered by a collective bargaining agreement or unions dropped from 27% to 11.6% between 1979 and 2019, meaning that the union coverage rate is now less than half where it was 40 years ago. And this means that employees have less bargaining power to advocate for pay rates in alignment with the work that they're able to deliver. And not having the ability to speak up and address these worker injustices has led to, constant disturbing stories that we're hearing nowadays about worker conditions. And we're hearing about disturbing workplace practices that are putting workers at risk, both physically and mentally. And a lot of these times, the workers that are the most impacted are contracted workers or people performing ghost work. So ghost work, it's a term that's used to describe the kind of work that feels like it's automated, but it really has a person behind the screen performing those tasks. And in our research at TechEquity on contract workers in tech, we found that contract workers receive fewer benefits and are paid less than full-time tech employees. And while doing the same work as their directly employed counterparts, these workers are still disproportionately Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, women, and non-binary people. And it's a little out of context that the tech industry came to power and cemented itself as the engine of our current economy. The tech industry's position as arguably the most powerful sector of American business requires that they do take some responsibility for how the economy has grown and is going to continue to grow. And in addition, tech should employ business practices or create products that are directly impacting the economic health of our communities. And if we look at the top companies in our economy today, I mean, tech does own a lot of the market share. We have a couple of familiar faces on there: Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, just to name a few. So like we've talked about, tech didn't create social and economic equity in the US, but it does have a role in worsening inequity, and therefore it has a responsibility to help fix it. At TechEquity Collaborative, our community of tech workers, activists, community members, and advocates have civic power to help rebalance this power within and outside the tech industry. And we identify and uncover overlooked issues of inequity so that you can champion for some of these solutions. And how does tech equity work? Well, our goal is to change the conditions in which the tech sector is growing. And we believe that effective structural change will eliminate a culture and policies that have institutionalized inequity, leading to stronger and more resilient communities. And we help our communities approach these big problems and engage in the system change in three major ways. So we educate you about the most critical civic issues wherever you live. We do that in a variety of ways. We host book club discussions, panel discussions, webinars such as these. We produce voter guides around election season. We also advocate for public policy that rebalances and builds economic equity. And a perfect example of that is our work on the Tenant Protection Act here in California of 2019, which extends protections to 8 million California renters, preventing unjust evictions and price gouging of rents, or also our work on the Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act, or SB 1162 last year, which was around increasing pay transparency and requiring more equitable hiring practices. And finally, there's corporate practice, aiming to turn companies into agents of equity in the broader community. And we do that through corporate partnerships and engagements with companies. So what issues are we seeing within tech and as a result of tech that we can help address? Well, within the tech sector, we see large disparities emerging between headquarters, warehouse, and contracted workers, and temporary, contract, and contingent workers who are hired through these contracting agencies are often doing the same work as their directly employed peers while making less money, receiving fewer benefits, and experiencing career mobility. And at TechEquity, we've done the research known as the Contract Worker Disparity Project to help uncover some of these issues. And at the same time, the tech industry has an imperative to make its employee base more representative of the population at large, not just to create broader economic opportunity, but because companies with diverse representation at all levels are more likely to be successful than those that aren't. And like I said, we worked on the Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act, SB 1162, to address some of these inequities within the tech industry. And there's also inequities as a result of tech that we've been working on. tech has produced a lot of wealth, but that wealth has exacerbated our communities, and people have been displaced, homes have become more expensive. However, we can repurpose some of this wealth to strengthen tenant protections, produce more affordable housing, and help communities organize around policies that are changing the ownership structure back into the hands of the people instead of corporations. And we've tackled this issue through some of our work on Prop 13 reform. And next up, we have the impact of tech products. Prop tech is accelerating the corporate takeover of single family starter homes and renting at a mass scale. And these new companies, they're venture backed, digitally enabled, and they play an increasingly influential role in the economy, from new modes of housing construction to automated home buying. These tech enabled companies are promising to scale to massive market share and reap higher valuations along the way. So we have to be thoughtful about how we can work with companies to not reinforce biases in their products. And we're working on this already through our Tech Bias and Housing initiative here at TechEquity. And we're also building tools, visualizations, and apps that are supporting the movement for economic justice. We do have a team of volunteers, researchers, designers, coders, data analysts that are collaborating on tough problems and sharing their skills to help address some of these issues. For example, we've had volunteers in the past help us build a website that renters can use to find out if their landlord's rent increase is illegal and how to get help. If you do want to check out that site, it's tenantprotections.org. There's a rent calculator on there, and you can find out more information on, like I said, whether rent increase is legal or illegal and how to get access to help. This year for us at TechEquity Collaborative, our key initiatives really begin with the Contract Worker Disparity Project, which I kind of already talked about. It's a first of its kind worker-centered initiative that sheds the light of practice on contracting out and proposes and advocates for public policy solutions and partners with companies to adopt responsible contracting practices. We also have the Tech Bias and Housing initiative, examining the promises and perils of housing technology, aiming to ensure that technological innovations in the housing space do not reinforce the racist housing systems and policies of the past. And finally, we have the Housing Data Initiative. Passing good policy is meaningless if those policies aren't implemented well. And together with our coalition partners, government officials, we've been able to identify where tech can be a lever for smart policy implementation. And we enlist tech workers to build the tools, like we said, through our volunteer base, to move us from just talking about it to actually taking action. And you may be wondering, well, what can you do today, right? Well, you can sign up to become a civic tech volunteer. We have tons of projects where we do need, like I said, people with a variety of different skills to assist and help push those projects forward. You can flex some of those tech skills that you have. You can tell a friend about us. The more people that know about us, the greater, the more support we can possibly get. You can contribute to the organization if you don't have time, or you can join me for a one-on-one conversation. I do offer an opportunity to chat with people via phone, via Zoom, a one-on-one meeting, and kind of just get to know, you a little better, talk about what kind of journey you'd like to take here at TechEquity, learn about the organization a little bit more, and ask questions on a more one-on-one level. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link on the follow-up email I'm gonna send out after, and you can schedule something with me. And also you can check us out, for future events. We do host a ton of events. If you go on our page, you can get a link to all the recordings of previous events that we've hosted. So I'm sure that was quite a bit of information to absorb. So I'm gonna, take about a minute to see if anybody has any questions. Like I said, we will have a follow-up email go out afterwards to everyone. With the link to the recording and then the slides. I'll just take a second. And also, if you think of something later, totally fine. You can let me know later as well. Cool. Not seeing any questions. That's totally fine. Like I said, I want to thank you so much for your time. We hope you feel inspired to join our growing movement. If you do think of something, reply back to that email, and I'm happy to answer questions via email. Or if you'd like to schedule something with me one-on-one, a little something more personal, I'm always happy to like I said, hop on a call, hop on a Zoom meeting, and get you pointed in the right direction. Even if you have questions about the presentation, questions about the organization at large, yeah, just let me know. So I want to just thank everybody and hope you all enjoy your weekend.